Hello, I'm John Coleman from the RestauratioCenter, a sub-work of Apocryphastasis Institute. And today we're going to do a brief presentation on the sacred voice, culture, history, and performance with Dr. Hans Uter and Angela Malik. Welcome, both of you.
Thank you,
Welcome.
John.
So we've had Angela and Hans on before to talk about music, and different of them have presented at different events in the past. But here, Hans and Angela have come together with this course on the sacred voice. So beginning with Hans, and we can kick it over to Angela, can you explain what we have on deck for interested students? What is this course? And then we'll go into specifics, the time, that the course is running for and things like that. But what are we looking at, Hans and then Angela?
Well, what we have is a very unique course offering in that we'll be looking at the voice itself coming from both a religious context into the development of music in general over the past 2,000 years, looking at both the ancient world, Eastern and Western. So we're looking at the development of the Occidental tradition and the Oriental tradition, within also the aspect of how the voice is a mirror or a connector between the human and the divine, and how this is sort of the breath, like the sacred breath, etc. So I think it offers a very rich interplay of both historical and practical knowledge.
So my contribution is as a performer of 30 years, and my specialty has been in historical performances. So I have a lot to say about sacred music. I've spent, as most performers do, many years singing in churches, not only for concerts, but also liturgically. I'm Catholic. I sing in the traditional Latin Mass. So I know a lot about the Gregorian chant. I've studied that at the Clear Creek Abbey for the last almost 10 years. I teach chant, the vocalization of chant there now, in a summer workshop for their chant workshop. And I'm curious, this is why one of the main reasons I wanted to collaborate with Hans as an ethnomusicologist. I was very curious, and his great depth of knowledge into the East Indian tradition, to do a comparative analysis of the East versus West in terms of voice, the different kinds of harmonies, for example, the fact that one is almost primarily melodic and the other more harmonic, that'd be the Western one, the vocal technique itself, and again, this connection between the physical act of singing and how it is a nexus to the spiritual, the transcendent. So that's my end of it.
Great. Thank you for both of that as we look at sacred voice, culture, history, and performance. The next question I have, and we can just, for the sake of organization, I'll kick it to Hans, is how long are we looking for this course to run for, or is it variable? I know we have different lengths at the Institute. So what are we looking at with this course?
Well, this course, we're thinking, because we're going to do this in the summer, we're going to try to have it take place over most likely a week with all the different lectures, and then with the auxiliary material, and then with the possibility of expanding that out. So in this way, it's going to be sort of condensed, like you take a workshop or an intensive course. Other than that, it would be spread out over several months. So we're basically going to be doing that within the space of a week, and we'll be covering a tremendous amount of material, at least equivalent to a master's degree. No, just kidding about that, but potentially it's going to be very interesting, because we have Angela's a real expert in this, and I've spent a lot of years, many decades actually, involved in this in various ways. So I think it promises to be a very exciting and enriching offering.
And Hans, your wife is a classical Indian singer as well. So
Yes, she is. Yes.
so we were thinking potentially 3 days within the week, maybe 1 or 2 hours a night or something like that, just to avoid weekends, because a lot of people travel during the summer on the weekends. So that was a thought, maybe a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, or something like that.
Excellent. And I'm going to ask you soon enough, Hans, about some of those materials as well as Angela. But I'll kick off here with Angela. I know in our earlier discussion between you and I about your own courses that you offer through the Restauratio Center, you mentioned a wide swath of ages from grade school to adult students. But who do you see being appropriate for this course, the Sacred Voice, Culture, History, and Performance? What's, shall we say, the ideal student abstractly?
Well, I hadn't really thought about it, but I would say probably late teens would be the earliest, just out of curiosity. Definitely college students would be, not too dense for college students. And the thing is, we're probably not going to get music majors in this. So we have to keep it on a certain level that people can understand it. There'll be a lot of listening examples. I think that makes it interesting. So it's not just dry lecture on, obtuse concepts. It's also getting to hear music from these various cultures and traditions over time. So that's what I would say. What do you think, Hans?
I would agree with that, because even though we're not going to be going into more advanced theoretical type of conceptual apparatus in the course, it will require some background and some basis. But we hope to make it open, to also help people rediscover the fact that these are living traditions that are here now, and the voices, unless you lost your voice, you don't need a musical instrument. It's here with you, right? Your breath and your body. This is the basic essence of life, and so that's why I think it's very important. The spirit inspiration, of course, is the breath, and how the body itself becomes this resonant expression. And so I think there'll be a lot of things that, even if you're not a vocalist per se, but things that you can sort of access in your daily life, as well as just getting a much more expanded view of the world, the history, and the importance of these sacred music practices.
Well, some people say that that we are the sacred vessels for this spirituality. When I was in Europe, I attended a class. It was before I was really had returned to the church, shall we say. It was kind of a Buddhist workshop or whatever, and they consider singers, particularly classical singers such as myself and your wife, they call them the divas, the gods and the goddesses, because they're that sort of conduit to the divine, right? The body as spiritual vessel for these higher concepts. So it's a fascinating thing. Even if you're not a singer, it's pretty fascinating. I used to do a little medieval workshop with these guys who would dress up in the medieval clothes, and we'd sing, songs from that period, and they'd play instruments, and we'd do it for children. They would always ask the children, "What's the greatest instrument?" And they would never guess it, but he would always say, "The voice, the human voice."
Yeah, well, the voice is the original musical instrument, and it's what is interesting, regardless of time and space, history, is that we're human, unless you want to. I'll be honest, I don't necessarily believe in the theory of evolution, but put that aside. But human beings, we have basically been the same physically for for quite a long time, and so we have the same apparatus that they did back in Middle Ages, back in whatever prehistory, unlike musical instrument techniques and performative things like that. So it's a way to actually embody these things, right? Especially with the voice, which of course you can do through an instrument. Vila, you can play instruments from the Middle Ages, or et cetera, but to actually sing, gives you an entry into that, it's sort of a feeling centering, but also becoming, I think a lot of people tend to be very disconnected from their actual embodiment these days. I think this is certainly something that we find with the current push towards the move into virtual reality and virtual space, right? And so the voice and, the voice, the throat, I'm very much interested in, say, anatomy and things like that, and how to connect with that kinesthetically. And the voice is just a wonderful way to do that, but also to at least access things you may not, like, for example, sitar. You probably don't want to spend 20 years trying to play sitar, but at least you can sing a little bit, and then you can get that connection. Same thing with Gregorian chant. You may not, become a great Bach level organ player or an opera singer, but everybody can at least enter into that space of the chanting. You know what I mean? At least taste it, you could say.
Well, and the early instruments in the medieval period and all that were basically imitations of the voice. A lot of the accompaniment was melodic as opposed to harmonic. It wasn't like a true accompaniment. It was more an imitation of the voice, right? And also, you talked about the voice being basically the same structure over millennia. I would say that's true, but what the voice does is it adapts to its space. So, for example, when you're singing in a very live space in Europe, in the great room of a castle, right, or a medieval church, which is stone, you develop a certain kind of technique, and the composition reflects that. Opera houses, fast forward, 17th century, all of a sudden you have to sing over an orchestra in a big house. And then fast forward to the 19th century with Wagner, where you have to sing over a 200-piece orchestra. So what happened to the voices over time? Well, they developed and got bigger and developed techniques around that. There were no opera singers in the medieval period, right? Opera didn't exist. So the voice changed based on its space and the instruments it had to sing over. And of course, the music was written for larger and larger voices. So we have kind of evolved in that sense.
Well, that's an interesting parallel, because you see kind of a reverse evolution, so to speak, with Indian music, in that before this was the classical music, at least, was always, mehfil, which means like the palace, or specific places. You generally speaking, more intimate audiences, but of course the stone and that kind of environment. But the emphasis was on having these very powerful voices, right? That, for these for acoustic environments. And so this developed till about the early 20th century. But with the introduction of the microphone, then suddenly you have people singing and even playing instruments to the electronic apparatus, right? So sometimes people are modeling their voice to the virtual, not virtual, but I mean, the space, the electronic space, the transferal of acoustic energy into electronic waveform through the microphone, which gives a type of intimacy, but also, transforms that whole space. So, you're absolutely right. The voice and space, which is a part of embodiment too, right? How we as embodied beings exist in the world are defined, and how the spaces that elevate us out of sort of the normal day-to-day life flow, whether it's entertainment, whether it's religion, right? That sort of elevate us from this, our mundane worlds. These spaces have changed. So it's also, not necessarily saying it's good or bad, but it's fascinating. And especially like Western opera singers, the development of the power of the voice is just, it's actually astonishing, right? If you look at this from, it's kind of like, you can see the abilities that develop, right? For example, you look at like sports, professional sports, people break a record, suddenly everybody can do it. Or, you know what I mean? So there's a constant potential of development. So.
Great. Thank you for that. And I know one of you has an appointment coming up, so I'm keeping an eagle eye on the clock there. So the last question I have is, what would be some of the resources you had mentioned earlier, Hans, some of the resources? What might a student be covering in terms of material, in terms of like written material, books they would need and things like that? And that's my final major point as we introduce this course, Sacred Music, Sacred Voice.
Well, at this juncture, we'd most likely be providing scanned PDF of certain like book chapters and things like that. So in terms of, I'm not myself aware of a single source, like a textbook that's going to cover everything that we're going to be discussing. So we most likely will be providing, and I'll be, writing some materials and providing whether it's scanned, scanned documentation or things like that. So we'll basically provide like a course book that people will get. And I don't know, Angela, if you want to answer that. I mean, some of these things you can go from, you get very specified and very detailed and very, academic or rare books that I think may be a bit far afield. But what do you think?
Well, we hadn't really discussed it, but I just assumed we'd be popping things up on the screen in terms of written material. And I would suggest that if people want to, since it's a listing course as well, that you get, on something where you can hear it on good speakers. So that would be the only maybe requirement.
Yeah, we'll be providing some of the scores and things like that, and so I'm planning on at least giving a PDF, a course sort of book that people can print off if they so choose, and so the listing but also of course understanding some of these things, the visual input of seeing the scores, looking at the evolution of music notation, also is going to be part of this. So.
Excellent, excellent. So thank you very much, Angela Malik and Dr. Hans Uter. Thank you very much for this rundown. As I say, I know people have appointments coming up, so this was a very nice, concise explanation for interested students for sacred voice, culture, history, and performance. People who are interested, students who are interested in enrolling, will write us at the Restauratio Center. That's simply RestauratioCenter@AOL.com. That's down below in the description, and you can ask any other questions you may have, and Dr. Uter and Ms. Malik will respond to you. So with that, thanks to the both of you, and we look forward to seeing you, audience, in class this summer.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Angela.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.